Elena. I'm the Assistant Director here at the Berwick Public Library. So tonight we have Amrita joining us to talk about square foot gardening. And I do want to mention that we have had Amrita here many times, and we have Ralph here from Berwick Community Media filming tonight's program. But if you'd like to see more, she has done many gardening programs at the library, and you can find them all on our website under the event tab. You can find recordings of all those past programs, as well as on the Berwick Community Media YouTube channel. So there's lots more that you can learn because she is a master gardener. So I'm going to turn it over to her to talk about square foot gardening. And again, make sure you grab a newsletter on your way out. They are right on that back table.
Thank you. First of all, I'd really like to thank the library for always being so welcoming for our programs. It's such a great location here. I love this library, and they're very generous in letting us bring our programs to you. So thank you. So tonight we're going to talk about square foot gardening. How many of you have either heard of or done square foot gardening in the past? Okay, 2 people. That's good. That's better than no people. But square foot gardening is a really exciting and easy method of gardening because it really helps to maximize your productivity and minimize the amount of work that you have to do in your garden bed. So we're going to go through some principles about square foot gardening tonight, and I have some other things to share with you as we go along. So square foot gardening was started by Mel Bartholomew, who was an engineer, and he really wanted to find a better way to do gardening that was easy for people. So he developed this square foot gardening technique back in 1981, and he's no longer with us. But while he was alive, he sold 2.5 million copies of this book, which I forgot to bring. I have mine at home. I did square foot gardening many years ago. So if you have a chance to pick up, I don't know if that book is here in this library. We'll have to check and see if they have a copy of it. But it's a very good book. It's pretty inexpensive.
There's one by the front desk.
Oh, there is. Great.
This morning there was, I don't know.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. So here are the steps that we're going to cover tonight. Very, very simple steps. Location, layout, using raised beds, making sure you have good aisles, taking care of your soil. If you have not been to our programs before, we did a program on soil. Soil is the #1 thing to take care of first in your gardening. If you have good, healthy soil, you'll have good, healthy plants. The planting grid, which we will talk about what that is and how it works. The spacing of your plants, using verticality wherever you can, how to care for the plants, and how to harvest. So those are the various sections we're going to cover tonight. So what is square foot gardening? It's a method of gardening that really encourages that you plan ahead and that you keep really good records. I have to say that I think in gardening, always keeping records is really helpful. I know it's so exciting to be in the garden and to do this and do that and not write it down. And then later you go, oh, what was that? When did I plant that? But if you can either use your phone, which is something you probably always have with you, use one of your note apps on your phone to just jot things down while you're in the garden. It's very helpful because you want to know what was successful and what was challenging. Maybe you tried a certain variety and it did really well, and you tried a different variety and it didn't do well in this climate. And of course, it changes from year to year. Some years we have a much warmer spring than we've had. We don't have the frosts like we've had this year. The last couple of years have been pretty challenging, which, you know, I've only been here 2 years, so I don't know what it's like when it's easy to garden here. The last 2 years have been really challenging. It definitely promotes crop rotation. So crop rotation is a very smart thing to do in your gardens so that you're not always planting the same plant in the same place. because that can lead to diseases and pests and things like that. So you want to switch your beds around. So with square foot gardening, you could just switch which square you put things in from year to year. So that's why you need to keep your records. And it saves water consumption and a lot of weeding because it's planted so densely that you can use water much more efficiently. And when things are planted densely, it acts like a ground cover so that the weeds just don't have a chance to come up. So what are some benefits? It's a relatively quick setup. It's pretty easy to plan once you understand the principles, and we'll talk about that. There's no deep digging or really heavy lifting, which is really, I think, a very positive thing, mostly because with square foot gardening, we say that doing it in raised beds is much better than planting in the ground. So people are not so tempted to do tilling in a raised bed as they are in the ground. So no digging. I mean, there's digging to put your plant in, but that's it. And you don't have issues with soil compaction, which is definitely something you have when you're dealing with your plant rows in the ground. You know, you're stepping on the soil, and when you step on the soil, you compact it, and that's really harmful to the soil. So when you're doing things in your raised beds, you want to make sure that your raised bed is probably no more than 3 or 4 feet wide so that you can reach into the center and not have to step into the center. The soil is much warmer in raised beds than it is in the ground, so that's definitely a plus. Less weeding, we talked about, easy to water. You have a greater yield because of the way, we'll talk about exactly with the planting. You can see actually in that picture how closely things are planted, so you have a much greater yield and easy to upkeep. There are some drawbacks. It's a smaller footprint garden space, so it makes it harder to grow the larger crops. So I'll give you an example. And this may not make much sense to you at this moment, but it will as we go along. So this is a planting square. So some things, you can plant 16 of them in a 1 foot square. Things like beets and radishes and much smaller crops. And then you have things that where you can only put 4. But think bigger things, and Gail and I were just talking about this. Sometimes, depending on the variety, like of a tomato or a pepper, will take up 2 squares. So you have less space for some of the bigger things. So you just have to decide what it is you want to plant. So you need to have a succession plan. So succession planting is really a good way to grow. So say you put in early peas. When those peas are done, you can take those peas out and plant something else that does better in the warmer weather. That's called succession planting. So there again, you want to have your plan. You'll know that in this area, I'm putting peas maybe in 2 or 3 blocks across. I'm putting peas. When those peas come out, what am I going to put in? Beans, probably, something like that. The soil can be somewhat costly for raised beds, depending on if you make your own compost or you have good topsoil available to you, but it can be more costly. And the dense method is somewhat counterintuitive, because if you look at the planting guides and the packages of seeds, you know, it says, oh, so many inches apart. And with this method, you don't really pay so much attention to what it says on those packages, because you can plant things much more closely. And you have to get used to that because we're used to the old way of planting in rows. And sometimes there are less varieties that are really attractive to square foot gardening. So with the community garden this year, we're looking at some different sized plants that will hopefully be more suitable to this. So like we've chosen a container variety of zucchinis. They have a much smaller footprint. They don't sprawl way out like the zucchinis we're used to. So they're called a patio zucchini. So there are some varieties that are a little more suitable to square foot gardening. So is it right for you? May not be right for everyone, depending on what you want. Is your space limited? Do you want to maintain a garden with minimal effort, or do you enjoy spending hours and hours and hours working in the garden? You know, different people have different things that they like to do. Are you concerned about overwatering and underwatering? Do you want to lengthen your growing season? Is this the first garden, or have you had troubles with gardening before? Real challenges? And is being more self-sufficient important to you? So is really having a production kind of garden where you can have lots of things that you need to store for winter? That could determine whether you want to do square foot gardening or not. Because things like pumpkins and that don't do so well in square foot gardening. Okay, so number one is location. First thing is learn your hardiness zone. Did you know that last year that the USDA changed the hardiness zones? We used to be a 5B, now we're a 6A. So this next, I'll just show you this slide. We have gone up at least 3 degrees per year on an average. I looked across the country at just kind of a cross section, and some places it's 5 and 6 degrees. It's amazing how climate change is affecting our hardiness zone. And you can find this right on the USDA site. I put a black and white copy of it in your notes. Oh, and I forgot to mention that I gave you a sheet here where you could take notes next to the slides. So usually I talk about that at the beginning and I forgot. So feel free to take notes. We'll go back to this slide. You want 6 to 8 hours of sun a day. So you want to make sure that wherever you put your bed gets that 6 to 8 hours of good sun every day. Well, not every day, because some days we have rain, but on average. You want it to be easily accessible. You don't want to put it in the back 40 where you're not likely to go out and check it, right? You want it to be accessible to where you're going to get to it easily. You want to have water nearby, some source of water nearby. And you definitely want it to be protected from extreme weather. So some sort of windscreen, you know, you can see here in this, there's trees and shrubs around it, but it gets good light. So there's our zone map. You can see how it's changed from 2012 to 2023. Okay, step 2 is your layout. So again, I said planning ahead is really important. So first of all, what do you want to plant? What do you like to grow? What do you like to eat? I guess that's the place to start. What do you like to eat? If you don't like to eat eggplant, don't plant it. If you don't like peas, don't go to the bother of putting peas in. Put in the things that you love to eat, that you are excited about growing. And don't focus on things that you think you should plant, right? Because there's no should about it. It's what you want to do, what you will be excited about doing and have the enthusiasm. So use a planting chart and guide. So I gave you a planting chart. I don't have a copy of it. Can you hold yours up? That planting chart. Use that to help you figure out when you're going to start things. Now, with the Berwick Community Garden, we have already started all of the plants for the people who will be gardening. We have started 2,800 plants. So you don't have to worry about starting them. But if you're starting them, you want to use, can I see this one for just a minute?
Absolutely.
I can't remember how I color coded it. So down at the bottom you'll see that is the legend. So the sort of peachy colored things show you that just by color that's when you want to start those seeds. Okay? Starting seeds indoors. I didn't do anything about transplanting indoors because if you don't have a greenhouse, it's pretty hard to do transplanting and caring for plants indoors. So I didn't even make I made the category, but I didn't fill anything in. But that would be like if you started your tomatoes in March, then you would transplant those indoors, which is, I didn't have that right, so I can't tell you. Probably around middle to late April, you would do the transplanting indoors, meaning you would take it from whatever you planted it in first, which would be quite small, and now they've grown bigger and their roots are getting bigger, so you would put it into a bigger pot. And with tomatoes, you would put it into a much deeper pot because they have really robust roots. And then the blue is when you would transplant it outside. So say you started the tomatoes around the 15th of March or the 10th of March, you would plant that outside after the soil warms. That's for tomatoes. It's definitely about frost, but it's more importantly how warm the soil is, because if you put tomatoes in soil that's too cold, they're just going to sit there and go, what did you do to me? I'm not growing. And then once the soil gets warm, then they'll take off. So you don't want to do it too early. In here, I've put it pretty, I hope, pretty safely at June 15th for putting tomatoes in the ground. And then the green section is what you can plant directly. We call it direct sowing. So things like you can do beans, you can do carrots, radishes, beets, spinach, those kind of things that can be just directly sown right into the ground. So I've run this by a couple of people who've given me a few little changes, but this should be fairly accurate for our zone, for our area. There you go. Okay, where was I? Oh, using the planting chart, right. And then we talked about organizing your successions. So this chart will really help you with that, because mostly your successions will be things that will be direct sowed. So say you had something that was started in a greenhouse, and then it's done, and your succession plantings will most likely be things that are direct sowed, except if you're doing a fall garden. So like broccoli and things like that, and kale that you're going to do in the fall. Those you will want to start during the summer to get ready for that. And then you want to also include plants that deter pests. So make sure you're putting in things like marigolds and dill and I'm trying to think the name. Oh, anise hyssop. Anise hyssop is a wonderful one. I did not give you a list of those, but you could look up, you could do a Google search on companion planting and find, and plants that deter pests. There's a lot of information about that. So there's your planting guide. I could have just moved to that. I forgot I had a slide. All right, so as I said before, raised beds are really do very well with square foot gardening. And as you can see here, this bed, you want to make sure when you have a raised bed that your inside measurement of your raised bed, in other words, this part of the bed, not out here, is that you have equal 12-inch diameter inside the bed. Because if you're measuring your bed from the outside and you're using, 1-bys, you're not going to have a full 12. So you want to make sure. And I've never bought a raised bed, so I don't know if they measure. Do you know, Gail?
I usually make them, but it
Yeah.
depends on the cross board
Yeah.
and, the dimension it's going to
Yeah.
be. So, the end boards.
Yes. Okay. And you want, as I said before too, you want to make sure that it's easily reachable, into the center from the outside, so that you don't have to step in and you don't have to really wrench your back either. You want to totally make sure about your body mechanics when you're gardening, because you don't want to not be able to garden because your back hurts. That's one great thing about the Berwick community garden that we're building, is that all of the beds are going to be raised beds. So they're all going to be 28 to 30 inches high, so you can actually sit on the edge of them. And again, as I said before, having a bed like this, because that's 4 feet wide, you can reach into the center. It discourages getting into the bed so that you don't compact the soil. So I just was talking about the bed. This is what the beds will look like, or a close proximity to this. This is the basic design. So these are 28 to 30 inches high, and they have this 1x6 on the top, so you can actually sit on this. You can put your water bottle on it. You can lay your plants on it when you're getting ready to plant. These are also made of corrugated roofing, so that they last longer. And this bed was, this picture was taken at the Kennebunk Community Garden, and they were generous enough to share their design with us. They're beautiful beds, actually. Okay, aisles. You want to make sure that you have your aisles wide enough. Last fall, I visited a bunch of gardens in Seattle, Washington. Just all different styles of gardens. And some of them had like this much in between them. And, you can't get a wheelbarrow down that. It's pretty hard to carry buckets down something that's that skinny. So you really want to leave your aisles wide enough. 4 to 5 feet is really good, a good width to have for your aisles. It just makes moving around easier. It makes doing the jobs easier. Like if you're working in your bed and you've got something sitting there and somebody else wants to walk by, you have plenty of room for that. And you can use lots of different things. I've seen many different ways that people have done their aisles. Sometimes it's grass, sometimes it's some sort of ground cover, which is really beautiful, like creeping thyme or something like that. Cardboard and mulch, bricks, stones, gravel, just dirt. And as I showed you in this picture here in Kennebunk, they just use the landscape cloth, just bare landscape cloth. Okay, we talked a little bit about soil. So I'll make this short because there's a whole class about soil, so make sure you check that. because that's where it all starts. We really need to take care of the soil. If we have really healthy soil with lots of life in the soil, you're going to have good quality plants, you're going to have great produce, and you're going to have fewer problems. And it promotes a good ecosystem. So the recipe, the best recipe for raised beds is 50% topsoil, 30% compost, and 20% some kind of other organic matter. So that can be a really good thing to use is chopped up leaves, shredded leaves, something like that. Whatever you can find. Let's see, what else does it say here? Worm castings, mushroom compost, ground bark. Those are all good things to use. The things that I would not use, because they're not sustainable. And I see lots of people using them, and I myself have used them at times, especially when I'm starting seeds. Peat moss, vermiculite, and perlite. Those are all things that are not sustainable. In other words, we use them up, they're gone from the planet. So if you can find things that do similar things without using those, it's a much better practice for the planet. So here's the planting grid. We talked about it. There's lots of ways that you can do it. There's some really fancy things that you can buy that are really expensive, these grids and things, but it's not really necessary. And it's just one more thing to buy and one more thing that adds to the junk on the planet, because a lot of them are made from plastic. So the easiest way, really, is to just use like tomato twine and either a small little nail or an eye hook, like on the edge. You can either put it on the top edge or inside the edge here, and just tie your twine on it. And the tomato twine will last just fine for the year. You want to keep it there. It's not just for the planting. It's really good to keep it there for the whole season, because if you're doing succession planting, you'll be able to actually see, where the grid is. So I highly recommend that you just do something really simple like using the twine. And so the rule, as I was saying, it's 1, 4, 9, and 16. So there's your grid right there. And I got this just because I wanted to see what it looked like and see if maybe we would use it for the kids in the children's garden. But again, there's a million gimmicks out there, and it's plastic. So it's not really necessary, but you can use a ruler just as easily, or just a piece of wood that has the hash marks on it. You could use different colors or something, a little bit of paint, a little bit of magic marker or something to make the different colors. So you don't have to have something that's this cute. And it is cute. Cute cells, right? Spacing. So again, it goes back to this. But I like to grow things that look pretty. I like pretty gardens. I like to have things that's just not everything all the same. So it's really fun if you can plan your garden ahead to do something like this, where you have things growing right next to each other that look beautiful together. So there's a ground cover there, there's a nasturtium there, and some lettuce and the cabbage, and I think these almost look like garlic, but I don't know if I would plant garlic in with my other things, but you could do onions. You don't have to do it that way, but I think it makes for an attractive garden, and for me, if something's attractive, it's more fun. But I suppose if you're just really looking for production, you can just do rows of all the same thing. The great thing about this method, as I said before, is that you can plant things closer together and increase the yield, because it then creates this canopy that will shade things underneath. Like you can grow something larger, like maybe a cabbage or something, and you can grow lettuce underneath it where it's getting the shade from the larger plant. And it helps with weed control, and it also helps to keep the moisture in. You can certainly mulch this garden as well. Like with, I would say probably something in a garden like this, using straw is probably the best thing. Straw or leaves, something small. You can use newspaper, but I think it would be a little tricky getting it in between all the, maybe shredded. You could do shredded newspaper, yeah. Or shredded cardboard even.
Get it wet
Mm-hmm.
first and then clean.
Yep. Oh, I got this weird message here. I hesitate to touch it because I don't want it to. Okay, I'm just going to ignore you. We're just going to move on. Will it let me? It won't let me. Okay, remind me later. Okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay, here's a sample layout. So this shows you what I was talking about. So here's a zucchini and a tomato. So this is putting them in one square rather than two. There's another tomato. Let's see, what do we have here? It's hard to see that up close like that. But you can see the different things. This looks like radishes to me, so you can put 16. So different types of plants, like 2 celeries, 2 chards, lettuce, kohlrabi, onions. So for each plant, and it goes basically on the size of the mature plant. That's how it's calculated. But you can see that's a 4x4 garden. So you can grow quite a bit in a 4x4 garden. So I wanted to share this with you because this is a really nifty thing, and it's free. So, and you have this in your paperwork so you can get the URL. So from Gardener's Supply, they have created this cool little designer. So you can go in and decide what it is you want to plant, how big your bed is, right? So those are the 2 big things. What do I want to plant? How big is my bed? You put those things in, and then, so see here you have bed size. This is a 4x4. And then you can drag these things into the grid that they show you, and it will populate those plants in a square. It's so cool. And then you can print it, you can save it, you can download it, you can do the notes. It's really cool. So I say try it. I've done it. It's really fun. And then, so back here it says guide at the end there. So then if you click, I think, I'm remembering this right, once you have your grid, you click or double click on that plant, and then it will take you to this, take you to the planting guide, which tells you how deep to plant it, when do you plant the seedlings, if you want to replant, what the spacing is, how many days to harvest, and what to do to take care of it so it really flourishes. And then, so this is for basil, then it goes over here and it gives you all of this data about the plant. So cool, so cool. Because I'm telling you, I have looked at so many different planting apps. Probably anybody who's a gardener has done that. Oh, I need something to figure out how I'm going to plant, right? There are a zillion of them out there, and most of them are expensive. Tear your hair out trying to figure out how to do it, and any other number of problems. This one's easy. Okay, verticality. So you definitely want to maximize the space that you have when you're gardening. So, you know, if you're limited here, right? You got a 4x8 bed. Okay, so I have those squares. What else can I do? Go up. Go up. So this is a beautiful trellis here going between two beds that looks like they're growing peas on it here, and I'm not sure what they're growing on the other side, but so like you could grow peas on it, and then when the peas are done, you could put cucumbers in and grow the cucumbers up it for the summer. So utilizing verticality is really important, and it's fun. Creating trellises is a lot of fun. So it saves space, and it also gives shade to plants underneath. So if you pulled this back in a little farther, you could do lettuce down here, depending on where your sun is coming in, of course. You could plant lettuce or other things that maybe don't want, like cilantro, things that don't like it really hot, that bolt really fast. It provides more sunlight and airflow. We all know that airflow is important in the garden. If you have stale air or blocked air, you're going to have things like powdery mildew, all kinds of fungus and problems. I hate to say the word, but blight is an issue here on tomatoes. I never knew much about blight other places I've lived, but I learned about it last year out here in this garden. We had it. We managed to work with it all summer long, but we had to really work with it every day. Every day we had to do things. So if you can get more air and more light into your plants, it's better. Definitely better. And I think it adds visual interest. I just love different kinds of trellises. I think it's fun to have different elements, different heights, you know, so it's not so boring. I've never enjoyed gardens that were just rows and rows of plants. It's just boring to me. I'm an artist, so what can I say? So here's some styles. And this is just a few. I mean, the sky's the limit, really, for what you can do for trellises. And of course, you know, different kinds of trellises for different kinds of plants. I love creating teepees for beans. I mean, that's an easy one, really easy one to just, for your beans, just put bamboo poles in, pull them together in the center, tie them up, and then string around it, and the beans love it. But there's so many ways. The cattle panel ones like this are beautiful. Obelisks are just gorgeous. They're expensive, but they're gorgeous. I've even seen people use step ladders. This is not, but it's similar. Use step ladders, which is really a cute idea and a great way to recycle. Okay, care. It's pretty much the same as any garden. The first thing, and what I always tell gardeners, is first time in the day, take your coffee cup or your tea cup or whatever you like to drink in the morning, go out to the garden, greet the garden. Good morning, garden. How's everybody? Walk around and monitor, look at your plants. See how they're doing. Are they healthy? Are they happy? Or are they starting to turn yellow? Or are they getting blight spots? Or is there some kind of pest on there? You don't know that unless you look at it. And so if you do that first thing in the morning, then you have the day to figure out what you're doing. I realize people are working, there's schedules that kids are going to school, and you have lots of other things going on. But if you can do that, if you can get up early, it's a wonderful way to start the day. Get up early and greet the garden and monitor the garden. Water is always important. Water early in the day. Some people like to water at night, but I think that that can lead to issues of fungus. So if you water early in the morning, it has the day to dry off and to do what it needs to do without sitting on the plants. And weeding, I think that with this kind of gardening, you have a lot less weeding to do. Pest control, as I said, with this kind of gardening, and the fact that you're doing raised bed gardening, so you're not, the pests have to work a lot harder to get onto the plants, although some of the flying pests. You can utilize things like row cover, if you know what that is. It's a fused fabric, light, it's usually white, so you see them gardens covered with white fabric. It's a very thin fabric. So for things like broccoli, your brassicas, broccoli and cabbage and things like that, where the white butterflies come and say, oh, this is a great place to lay an egg. And then a few days later, you have this great big hole in your... So things that don't need to be pollinated by bees, you wouldn't want to put row cover over your tomatoes or your peppers or things like that, because the bees have to get in to do the pollinating. So that can help if you can use row cover on things where you tend to get the worms. There's a whole system of integrated pest management, which we are going to do in the community garden, that says to use the least invasive thing first, and you hopefully can take care of the problem that way. First, you start with prevention, right? Start with prevention, then the least invasive, and the very last thing ever is to hit it with poison. So it's a more natural way of taking care of the garden. And then soil care. So soil care mainly in this instance means keeping the soil covered. So think of the soil as the skin of the earth, right? What do we do when we're out in the sun? We either put on clothing that covers us or sunscreen, because our skin burns. Well, the soil burns too, and the plants burn. So if you can keep the soil less hot and covered with some sort of a mulch, it's much, much better for the soil. Let me do it on time. Oh, good. And lastly is our harvest, which to me is sort of the most fun thing. I like it all, but when I see a basket like that of things that I've grown, I get very excited. In fact, 2 years ago, Dennis will remember this, 2 years ago, I was in the garden and I was picking beets, and I had a whole armload of beets. This was in early July. I was so excited, and he was over here back behind me. And I had the armload, and I went, Dennis, look! And I caught my foot on a post that I had to keep the hose from going into the garden. And I did garden gymnastics, and broke my thumb. So I've learned to not get quite so excited about the harvest while I'm in the garden. So learn to recognize ripeness. That's something that comes with time and with maturity, I think. One thing that you can pick a little less than completely ripe are tomatoes. If you pick your tomatoes just a little before they're completely ripe and let them ripen in the house, you have a lot less pest problems. And sometimes, we get a big rain and then the thing goes. So harvest early in the morning. So that's the other thing when you're doing your monitoring. You can do your harvest then, or you can do the greeting first and then go back and do the harvest. Use a knife or scissors or clippers to do your harvesting. I mean, I know it's really easy. My mom always had a black thumb from using her thumbnail to pinch things off, but it's actually better for the plants if you use the right tool. So use scissors or clippers to clip it off. On things like kale and lettuce and turnip turnip greens or things like that, you want to harvest the outer leaves rather than taking the whole plant, because a lot of times the plant will just continue to keep growing. And if you cut it off, sometimes it will resprout, but it takes a lot longer. So you actually get a much better harvest if you just harvest the leaves from the outside. I mean, it looks really pretty when you have a whole head of lettuce. It's gorgeous, but it's actually better if you just harvest the leaves as you need them. Then you have the freshest thing, you know, and if you can't eat that whole head for dinner, then it sits in the refrigerator, and it's better to just take what you need. And try to disturb the soil as little as possible, especially in this style of gardening, because things are close. So if you don't need to harvest that whole thing by pulling out the roots, it's actually even better for the soil if you don't do that right away. So you have to think about how you're planting to start with, and then how you're harvesting. Okay, so let's review. By the way, I used a different program, but this is one of the garden beds that I laid out. This program is pretty, but it's very hard to use. So, and you have to pay for it. But I did lay out some of our garden beds for the community gardens so that people could see a sample of what they might be able to grow. So, reviewing, square foot gardening is the practice of dividing and growing an area into small square sections. Pretty simple. The aim is to assist the planting and creating of small but intensely planted garden vegetables, thereby maximizing your production. And it results in a simple and orderly garden system that's easy to maintain and to manage. Okay, that's all I have. Questions? Yes?
When do we get to find out what plants are available?
Soon. I'm working on it. I have the basic database, but I really wanted to put it in a format that was a little easier to manage than looking at my database. So soon. Yes?
Would you use any fertilizer or anything?
You can use, because you're going to use compost and really have a really good healthy soil, yes, you will need to use some fertilizer, like for your tomatoes and things that really are heavy feeders.
What would you recommend?
So you can use things like fish emulsion and compost. You can use some manures, but you want to make sure that they're cold manures or that they're well composted. Manure tea, and it's not tea that you drink. You make manure tea by steeping it in water with an air filter that keeps it going. There's lots of information about manure teas on the internet. If you want to buy a brand, Down to Earth is a good brand, and Espoma is also a good brand that I've used both of those, and I like those if you want to use fertilizers. Stay away from synthetic fertilizers, especially on your food. It's just not good for the planet. It's not good for your plants. It's certainly not good for you to ingest. Okay. I put some applications back there on the table. If you're interested in being a part of the community garden this year, either as a volunteer or as a gardener, we still have some plots available. We have lots of wonderful things that people can do to help as volunteers, and it's all volunteer run, including my time and Dennis's time. Any other questions? Yeah?
I just have a question about the website you put up.
Uh-huh.
Does that ask you for your zone?
You know, that's a good question. I don't remember. I don't remember. You'll find out when you go to it. I can't quite remember.
It tells you when to plant it, I think.
Yeah, so it must ask you your zone. Yeah. Because otherwise it wouldn't be helpful, right? Yeah. It's been a while since I've been on there, so I don't really remember. That's a good question, though. Anybody else? Well, thank you. I'm glad you all came. It always makes me happy to share information. I hope that you try this. Let me know. You can email me. I'd like to know how successful it was if you try it. Or if you have any challenges, I can see what I can do to help.